Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'll tell you a little bit about myself before we get started. I'm a local historian. I graduated from Stony Brook University with a BA in History and Anthropology in December of 2017. In May 2018, I earned my master's in history. So my graduate research focused on the convergence of women, labor, and the environment through these global maritime extractive industries. Specifically whaling and fishing, although I did look a little bit at oystering and now scalloping. So today I'm here to talk to you about the Peconic Bay scallop industry. And this one I thought was really fascinating when I got into it. So I've included an outline so you can see a roadmap of where my talk will be going tonight. We'll start out by laying the importance of scallops. We'll then discuss the ecology of Peconic Bay scallops, and this background will help us to understand the precarity of this resource, which will be important as we move into a discussion on the history of the industry. We're going to talk a little bit about the working conditions faced by men, women, and children who made this industry possible. And then we'll talk about the rise of popularity of scallop dishes. I will share a few really fun examples of historic recipes which use scallops. We'll move into a discussion on the fluctuations in scallop populations throughout the 20th century. And then we'll finish up by bringing this chat up to present and speculating on what the future holds. So Peconic Bay scallops, also known by their scientific name Argopecten iridans, are the jewel of the Eastern Long Island recreational and commercial fishery. So their market rate can be as high as $30 for a single pound. They are a fall and winter delicacy throughout the northeastern United States. Peconic Bay scallops have enormous cultural and economic significance in this region. The scallop industry began in 1876 when Captain Tuthill discovered scallops in Peconic Bay. Ever since, the industry has demanded the hard work of men, women, and children in wet, cold, and kind of miserable conditions on Long Island's East End. According to one writer, Peconic Bay scallops were treasured parts of New Yorkers' diets, and that writer said, like many other good things for the New Yorkers' table, it comes from Long Island. They were so popular, he said, that they outpaced and outranked those from an area really known for its shellfishing. Fishermen of the Maine coast also catch scallops, but Fulton Market dealers say that they cannot equal the Long Island ones. So historically, the Bay scallop harvest has been a really significant economic engine for Long Island and New York City fishermen, fish markets, and restaurants. However, in 2019, about 90% of the shellfish harvest actually died off before the harvest began. And this mortality event was really catastrophic for local baymen and restaurant owners throughout the region. The scallop industry has a long history with a great deal of influence on Long Island culture and culinary tradition. As climate change impacts baymen's yields moving forwards, New Yorkers really have to figure out a way to commemorate that history while reckoning with this changing world. And I always like this quote. I found it in the Madrid Herald, and it's from January 4th, 1906, and it just states what the average person doesn't know about scallops would fill a pretty big book. So let's talk a little about the ecology of Peconic Bay scallops. Bay scallops live in shallow waters among eelgrass beds. Unlike many other shellfish, they lay on the bay bottom and they don't burrow under the sand. So they're characterized by these bright, tiny blue eyes, and the eyes line the outer rims of their shells. And bay scallops can actually swim backwards by contracting and relaxing their large adductor muscle to open and close their shells. This thrusts the water out and propels the scallop up off the bottom and away from danger. So bay scallops are filter feeders, which draw water through their gills and filter out the plankton. They typically live approximately 2 years, and in addition to being a popular choice for New Yorkers, they also feed sea stars, drills, crabs, and whelks. So after spawning in the summer, these bivalves attach themselves to the eelgrass. As they grow, they drop down to the bay bottom. According to an 1896 column in the Southside Signal, visitors in the summer may see them lying, shells and fish mingled, by hundreds and thousands of feet in 5 feet of shoaling water. So this is really important as we move forward in talking about the industry, but scallops are really sensitive to changing environmental conditions. They could be negatively impacted by seagrass loss, an increase in fresh water, or increased turbidity, and that's just when the water's really stirred up and it's less clear. So in the late 19th century, scallop season began September 1st. Baymen of the East End set sail at daylight on small boats, just big enough for about 2 men, and they would head for known scallop beds. So they threw out their dredges 3 on a side. The dredges sank to the bottom of the bay where the scallops clung. As the boat sailed along, pulling the dredges after it, the scallops were hauled in, and the baymen found out what sort of luck they had. So a good day's haul could produce about 30 bushels in the shell, and those 30 bushels in the shell would produce about 90 quarts for market. So here I've included 2 images for us. One, the one on the left is a scallop dredge, and the one on the right is, the one on the left is a scallop boat that would be pulling the dredge, and the one on the right is actually what that scallop dredge looks like. So that would just scrape along the bottom of the bay. So it's really important as we talk about scallops and a lot of maritime industries to recognize that it's not just the baymen on the water who are laboring over the scallops. So the scallop industry extracted the labor of entire communities. So men were involved in this work, children were involved in this work, and women were involved in this work. Particularly for scallops, women and children went to work as openers. In 1896, the Southside Signal reported, a good opener can get through with 12 gallons a day, and the pay is 20 cents per gallon. So men, women, and children performed this skilled labor, and it was known as opening. So the Madrid Herald on January 4th, 1906 described the process of opening. The opener takes a scallop in his left hand, deftly separates the shells with a knife held in the right, and quick as a wink removes the growth known as the rim around the white, meaty, eatable part. Many of the openers are so expert that they keep a steady stream of scallops flying into the box. According to one reporter, the women and girls often made the best openers, and their earnings were frequently quite large. One married woman at New Suffolk last winter made $3 a day, and she quit work long enough each day to go home and prepare her husband's meals. During the winter, when agricultural work ceased, Long Island farmers' wives and daughters joined the openers. And I mean, these images, they just get a sense of how young some of these children would be as they worked for their wages. So by the 20th century, the scallop market had grown and provided business for baymen in Jamesport, Mattatuck, Riverhead, New Suffolk, Shelter Island, and Greenport. Every morning, onlookers watched as the boats went down the bay, remaining until they were loaded, and generally returned with anywhere from 80 to 100 bushels. Captain Sidney Smith and George A. Vail were perhaps the largest dealers of scallops in Riverhead on eastern Long Island. Smith and Vail erected many scallop houses, which they rented to local scallop men, who would then be responsible for opening the shells. So there's something really interesting to note about Captain Sidney's business, and that is that he did not collect rent in dollars. So he would actually collect payment from the scallop men in scallop shells. Now, those scallop shells would be given to oystermen. Something to note about the oyster industry is that oysters need something hard to adhere to. So these oystermen would actually build artificial reefs. That way they could ensure that their crop wouldn't get burrowed under the sand. So by collecting the discards from the scallop industry, Sidney was actually recycling them to benefit the oyster industry, and he was trying to contribute to successful harvests on 2 different fronts. So scallops were served in just about everything. One 1896 column described the many ways to cook scallops. They could be fried in batter, baked, stewed, scrambled, served over salads, and more. And on November 8th, 1896, one writer for The Sun reported, the most general way of cooking scallops is to fry them. Rinse the scallops in cold water and drain them well. Then roll them in breadcrumbs to which salt and pepper have been added. Dip the scallops in a beaten egg and again in the crumbs. Drop the covered scallops into hot lard and cook them until they are a rich golden brown. Serve with sliced lemon. Tartar sauce, too, is exceedingly nice with fried scallops. When fried, scallops may be rolled in Indian meal instead of eggs and crumbs. So scallops were shipped from Long Island to Fulton Fish Market in New York City. Some arrived in butter tubs without ice, some had ice in tubs with the scallops, and a few shippers packed their tubs in barrels. In New York City, Long Island scallops were pitted against Rhode Island and Maine shellfish. So Fulton Market was established in 1822 and was the most important wholesaler fish market on the eastern coast of the United States. So it was also one of New York's earliest open-air fish markets. And in 2005, the market was relocated to the Bronx from Lower Manhattan. But this was a really important spot when we're talking about global extractive maritime industries and Long Island, or just New York in general. So part of my favorite part of researching this topic was looking at all of these historic menus. And I think you'll see why. So here we have the menu from 1918. It's Theodore Mueller Ladies and Gentlemen's Oyster and Chop House. This restaurant was located at 642 6th Avenue in New York City. And you can see that on this menu, this restaurant serves scallops 35 different ways. They take up almost the entire right side of the menu. And I know I can't think of a single thing I could get 35 different ways at a restaurant nowadays. So that just really speaks to the importance of scallops within New York City cuisine at this time. So I have another menu here. This is from Walton's Old Homestead, Oyster and Chop House. And at this restaurant, diners could order scallops in a stew, milk stew or cream stew, fried with or without bacon, fricasseed on toast, broiled with bacon, in milk, in cream, or with celery, or a la Newburgh. As Long Island baymen flooded New York City fish markets with their products, scallops became an integral part of New York City cuisine and culture. So scallops were a New York City cultural landmark, attracting tourists and Manhattan residents alike. Consuming scallops was equated with society life, museums, art, music, innovation. By bringing their crops to market in New York City, Long Island baymen influenced the cultural palates of New York City diners. And I found this one to be very interesting. So at their height, scallops were even cross-promoted with bananas by the United Fruit Company. So in 1939, United Fruit Bananas ran an advertisement for banana scallops. And this was a dish containing melted fat or oil, eggs, salt, bananas, cornmeal, and scallops. And it was intended to push banana and scallop consumption. And I don't know if you can read the first sentence of this advertisement, but United Fruit Company says that we like them. So fears that the scallop industry would collapse due to overharvesting gave rise to some early conservation and stewardship measures on Long Island's eastern end. So in 1924, the local government put out a new 2-inch catch law, resulting in conflict between baymen and local community officials. So as a result, in November 1924, 8 baymen, representing baymen of Greenport, New Suffolk, and Jamesport, met at a schoolhouse in New Suffolk to discuss the suitability of the new law. Captain Downs was in favor of the law, and he argued that the new 2-inch catch law, if honestly lived up to, would protect the future of the scallop industry. Otherwise, there would come a time where there would be very few scallops left in the bay. Other baymen feared that this 2-inch catch law would hurt their profits and would really impede them from being able to make enough to feed their families. At the same meeting, interestingly, the baymen held a heated discussion about the ethics of buying small scallops from elsewhere and planting them in the bay. And they also discussed whether or not it was right to involve child labor in this industry and how they could sort of mitigate potential harmful effects of involving very young children in the industry. So As we said before, bay scallops are prone to these dramatic fluctuations in population, and this adds a really rocky and unpredictable element to this industry. In 1924, reporters remarked on a dismal opening day. Um, Reporters said that only a single pint of the shellfish is known to have been caught when there should have been hundreds of gallons opened that night and set to market, where at this season of the year, they ought to fetch at least $7.50 per gallon. 4 years later, however, Baymen rejoiced. In October of 1931, one writer for the Suffolk County News reported that Baymen were elated at the fine catches of scallops they have been making during the past week in the vicinity of East Island, some of the boats averaging 60 bushels a day. The scallops are about the largest that they have ever caught in the bay and are of unusually fine flavor. The Baymen have good reason to rejoice in their good fortune in this respect, as there have been very few scallops in the bay for the past 10 years. The good times, however, did not last. In the 1930s, eelgrass wasting disease really decimated the scallop's habitat, and this led to a really drastic decline. So the Long Island Traveler reported that apparently the good old days not so long since, when anyone could gather a bushel of scallops in under an hour's time, have gone forever. So though they were a really unpredictable product, scallops appeared on the dinner tables of New Yorkers whenever they were abundant enough to be affordable. New Yorkers continued to find really inventive ways to serve these shellfish. The Long Island News and Owl ran a recipe for chicken potato chip scallops in 1946. I've included this recipe here for you all to see. And this news article recommended that the dish be served alongside molded cranberry salad, an assorted relish tray, hot rolls, fudge cake squares, and coffee. The author assured readers that it was a really great way of using up poultry. So in 1985, the first of a series of brown algal blooms swept through Long Island waters and decimated bay scallop populations. This algal bloom reduced water transparency and had a detrimental effect on eelgrass and the shellfish populations. So through the late 1980s and early 1990s, the scallop population rebounded, but was then limited by a severe brown tide in 1995. In 1997, East Hampton Town Shellfish Hatchery initiated restoration efforts, followed by really intense restoration efforts in 2006. And the 2006 efforts were led by the Long Island University and Cornell Cooperative Extension. By all accounts, these efforts seem to have really worked. In 2017, bay scallops accounted for $1.57 million in revenue. This infographic in front of us came from the Suffolk County Harmful Algal Bloom Action Plan from 2017. So by the late 2010s, scallops had become a staple of New York holiday dinners. So in New York City, diners at Midtown Catch Seafood, Dorian's, Fishtails, and Citarella looked forward to the seasonal dish. So John Ross, a chef from the East End, stated that the Peconic Bay Scallop is not just another local shellfish. It is so much more than that. And as we'll see from this presentation, the Peconic Bay Scallop is a cultural linchpin that really binds together New York City and Long Island. So Chef John Ross expounded on the importance of scallops, stating that creative chefs have come to the North Fork and have found new ways to cook and present those treasures, and to feature our bounty of fruits, vegetable, poultry, meat, and seafood on their menus. And they have done it in a way which preserves our unique heritage and culture. The Peconic Bay Scallop is one of the most important elements in the emergence of a true North Fork cuisine. So this image was taken from a New York Times headline, and we'll go into why it's here. But 2019 was another really catastrophic year for East End Baymen. In November 2019, Charity Roby reported, when the scallops are abundant, gulls pluck them from the shallows, drop them on the macadam from a height, and swoop down to eat the meat from the cracked shell. This October, for the first time in years, the yacht club parking lot was not carpet bombed with scallop shells. So on the Friday before opening day, anxious baymen, restaurateurs, environmental officials, and concerned citizens packed the East End Maritime Museum. And they were waiting to hear Stephen Tettelbach speak. And Tettelbach was a shellfish ecologist with the Cornell Cooperative Extension. And at that point, he could really only confirm what they already knew, and that was that it would not be a profitable season. So the 2019 Bay Scallop season opened on November 1st, and they opened to the news that nearly 90% of the scallop population had died. And the high price of scallops during the 2019 season, which was estimated about $40 a pound, was just simply too high for many restaurants to serve without actually operating at a loss. On December 6, 2019, Governor Cuomo requested a federal fishery disaster declaration for the Peconic Bay Scallop industry. The DEC undertook diagnostic studies of a sample of 32 bay scallops. And on January 31st, 2020, Bill Sagos, the commissioner of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, announced the detection of a parasite in Peconic Bay scallops associated with that 2019 mortality event. So in conclusion, the scientists believe that this mortality event stemmed from the combined effects of the parasite, high summer water temperatures, and really low dissolved oxygen during the previous spawning season. So at this point, they really do think it was a combined effect of all of these factors, and it's not any one single cause that resulted in this large-scale mortality event. So at the beginning of this lecture, I posed a question about the scallop industry. I asked, where are we now and where are we going? So throughout history, New Yorkers built a really thriving industry on scallops. And this is a resource subject to the effects of overharvesting, climate change, and predation. Intrepid New Yorkers built a tradition of culinary excellence around this really valuable and really unpredictable resource. And I think that speaks to just the spirit of New York, in which we kind of make do with what we have and we do it really well. This industry really exemplified the intricacies of regional economic exchanges dependent on unpredictable resources. The story of the scallop industry really demonstrates the dangers of climate change. So these creatures are stressed from warmer temperatures, loss of habitat, new pathogens and parasites, and the effects of ocean acidification. So as the water becomes more acidic, their shells are made of calcium, calcium carbonate, and they can actually start to get eaten away at. And that is a huge problem for the scallops to reckon with. So due to the combined effects of all of these factors, Peconic Bay scallops may be in a permanent decline, though they may not. This could just be another lull in the cycle. So in the years to come, the East End may need to reckon with this permanently diminished but not extinct scallop supply. At the same time, however, there is good news. Cornell's Cooperative Extension aquaculture team continues to plant bay scallops as part of local restoration efforts in hopes of giving local populations a boost. There are other organizations such as Half Shells for Habitat, which collect oyster and scallop shells from local restaurants, and they plant those out in the bay. They build up artificial reefs, and that is to help with the acidification I spoke about before. So that's supposed to make the water a bit more basic, which then in turn provides a better habitat for scallops and oysters to flourish in the future. Sometimes it's not so much about reintroducing these creatures for us to eat right away, and sometimes it's more about just having them out there to clean the waters and provide for future healthy populations that someday we'll be able to consume. For baymen and restaurateurs, the 2019 scallop failure set into motion really harsh economic realities. And then due to the COVID pandemic, the bay scallop mortality event largely disappeared from the news. East End and New York City restaurants were already reeling from the scallop die-off and then had to close their doors for several months, and in some cases forever. So it's too soon to really say how this turn of events will impact the future of the scallop industry and New York cuisine. So whenever I do one of these talks, I really like to show you all where I got my information from. I think it's really important because anyone can be a historian, and these are all sources which you could also find yourself if you were so inclined. So to build this narrative, I provided from a lot of different kinds of resources. While there have been a lot of works published, especially in recent years, about the oyster industry, I really wasn't able to find many books or articles focusing on the history of the Peconic Bay Scallop industry. So that was interesting. But to build an understanding of the environmental conditions which affect scallops, I looked at a lot of scientific sources, including publications from the Chesapeake Bay Program, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the Peconic Estuary Program, Biological Bulletin, and the DEC. So to investigate the history of the scallop industry, I looked at historic newspapers, including the Madrid Herald, the Southside Signal, the East Hampton Star, the Sun, the Suffolk County News, and the County Review. I looked at historic menus for New York City restaurants, and those were available through the New York Public Library. And the newspapers, the historic newspapers, were all available on the New York State Historic Newspaper Database. Those are really interesting and searchable. I also looked at a lot of modern news sources. Um, it is really fun sort of wading through all of these old sources and newspapers to see what people were saying about the Great South Bay, because of course I grew up around here. It's fascinating. So I'll now take any questions you may have for me.